theory has to have a priority.
Capitalism and artificial intelligence are the same thing.
The dimension of the future has disappeared.
There is actually no representation anymore.
There is no final resolution to contradiction.
Militant proletarian snake handling over abysses never gets much wilder than this.
All right, everybody, welcome back to The Dangerous Maybe. And today, Nance and I are going to try something a little new. Not too new, but a little new. And yeah, I guess there's two meanings of the word new here, Nance. Because what do you got there?
This is Peter Wolfendale's The Revenge of Reason, recent collection of essays and pieces that Urbanomic just put out. It's got a foreword by Ray Brassier, or a preface by Ray Brassier. But this is new. This is a new book that we just got our little mitts on.
Yeah, and so we have, ever since we heard about this book, we knew that we were excited for it and waiting for it to come out. And so, guys, like I've said this on some other streams, but this year in particular, these three neo-rationalist thinkers are going to be very much on our radar. And by that, I mean Peter Wolfendale, Ray Brassier, and Reza Negarestani. And we're going to do exegeses of some of their works that stand out to us. And it's more of a thing of just trying to facilitate our own education in these thinkers. And so we're going to kick this off with reading a short piece from Wolfendale's new book, The Revenge of Reason. But the double meaning of new is that this is the first time you and I are reading something that neither one of us have ever read before. And so this is in a theory context, the most like a reaction video that we can do.
Yeah, it's a react video rather than doing an exegesis, doing something that we're familiar with, we're comfortable with, and we have a lot of additional stuff that we can bring to it. This is a reaction. So instead of, watching drama or watching a TV show or watching, somebody do a skateboard trick and reacting to it, we're reading a book and giving our initial reaction to it. So,
all right, now we were trying to pick which piece to read first. We spent some time on that the other night. And look, some of the big theory pieces in here are long. So if we get around to reading one of them, it'll be probably one of our long exegesis videos. And we probably will read that before we do the video to get an idea of what we've got. This one, though, really lent itself to a reaction video. It's a very short piece, and it's certainly something that we were interested in. So, Nance, what is the title of what we're going to be reading tonight?
The Greatest Mistake, a case for the failure of Hegel's idealism.
So, yeah, this is something that I think we're both curious about. It's like, what is the greatest mistake in Hegel? And what would Slavoj and Todd have to say about this?
Yep.
Certainly questions we will be posing as we move along. But yeah, like we really don't know what Peter's going to be arguing in this piece. But we're going to find out. So I don't know. You want to say anything before we jump into this?
I'm excited. Like I said, this year we'll hopefully get into these three, Wolfendale, Brassier, and Negarestani. And I'm excited to kind of kick it off with this. I foresee it being very, very productive. There's a lot going on. So I'm looking forward to getting into it, and I'm happy to be starting it out with this new piece from this new book.
All right, let's find out what the greatest mistake is.
Let's do it. What is a great mistake? Nietzsche once said that a great error is worth more than a multitude of trivial truths. A truly great mistake is one that we can learn from, where we gain new understanding from explaining why it is an error, where we are either forced to make explicit our previously vague intuitions or forced to acknowledge properly counterintuitive results. Hegel understood this point well, as his analysis of the logical and historical development of human thought shows, for he takes each moment within this development to be a position that, while showing itself to be inconsistent, passes over into a more detailed position that incorporates its truth. It is my opinion that Hegel may have made the greatest such error in the history of philosophy to date, and this means that understanding why it is an error is of the utmost importance. To do this, it is necessary to examine the nature of Hegel's position, which he calls absolute idealism.
Okay, I mean, that's pretty crystal clear. I don't know if we need to spend too much time on exegesis here, but I mean, I definitely like this point of that an error can have this great philosophical value to it, because thinking through it and correcting it itself is productive of the truth. So I really like that. And so, yeah, he doesn't tell us what the greatest mistake is, but he's saying that there is one in Hegel, and that's what we're going to be exploring here. Anything you want to clarify about that first little section?
I do like, he does seem to respect Hegel, explicitly making its way through previously vague intuitions, and then it, being forced to acknowledge counterintuitive results. That is the way it works. Like, you start out with tree, the concept of tree, and it's when you encounter the embodied tree or the intried tree that you see how it fails to live up to this absolute standard or this concept of tree, but it reveals the truth of the tree itself. And this process is in operation, not just with trees, but with all things. So like, we're constantly going through this process of failures, and reckoning with those failures reveals the truth, or uncovers or discloses the truth of the actually embodied or intrigued, things, concepts, entities, whatever it is that we're dealing with. I like that. I like that he is, I think, signaling that he understands, like, he's not just doing the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Like, it does seem to be the case that he's respects Hegel, at least enough to get it, to get that brief summary right.
Yeah.
So good job, Peter.
All right.
Like, you need to hear that from me, dude, but
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate your validation.
Yeah, dude.
But no, I mean, look, if there's any chance that Peter sees this, it's more of a thing that, you and I have spent a lot of time thinking about Hegel, because he's so important to Slavoj and he's so important to Todd. And we're always measuring what we read about Hegel through what we've learned from them. And there's very often what we would consider to be misattribution.
Mistakes.
Yeah.
Or misappropriations.
Misinterpretations. Yeah. And so I guess that'll be a thing. We can't help but read stuff about Hegel through Slavoj and Todd.
Yeah.
Not to say that they're the final authority on this. I don't think there really is a final authority on this, but the way they read Hegel, their Hegel is the Hegel that we find to be the most interesting. I'll put it like that. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how much of Peter's Hegel is Slavoj and Todd's Hegel.
Yeah.
So.
What is absolute idealism? The essence of absolute idealism is the thesis of the identity of subject and object, which we will simply call the identity thesis. It's very important to understand what this doesn't mean. It is not to be understood along the lines of the maxim of Berkeley's subjective idealism. To be is to be perceived. To perceive is S-A-A est percipi. That's being is perceiving. It is not the case for Hegel that each individual object is identical with an individual subject that thinks it, or some state of that subject. Instead, the thesis can be interpreted in three different ways. This is indicated by the fact that there are three distinct formulations of it: as the unity of subject and object, as the unity of thought and being, and as the unity of subject and substance. Respectively, these correspond to idealism as method, absolute knowing, idealism as system, absolute idea, and idealism as reality, absolute spirit.
So maybe we should take a second here. And this is where I don't want to get ahead of myself with, or project where I think he's going. But I will say this, that for us via Slavoj and Todd, I mean, this is just going to be our default setting. The identity of substance and subject for us means that both subjectivity and objectivity are structured by contradiction, internal contradiction, or inherent antagonism. And that identity is the identity of identity and difference, or the identity, identity is the identity of the contradiction at the heart of identity itself.
Yeah.
And so, when, there's this way of reading Hegel that's pretty much the traditional way, which wants to make him the greatest philosopher of identity, because everything ultimately culminates and is incorporated into the identity of the absolute.
Yeah.
And but for our perspective, the absolute is itself inherently at odds with itself, and only is what it is on the basis of being what it is not. And so this is where you get into the problem of trying to make Hegel the philosopher of identity par excellence, because he's thoroughly rejecting Aristotelian substance, which is the ontological basis of identity. A equals A. For Hegel, A does not equal A. And so even the grand identity of the absolute never equals itself. And so, again, I'm just saying this like for context for where we're coming along. I don't know where he's going with it yet. But I just want to say, like, that's immediately what jumps out at me when I'm hearing this.
Yeah, I think for me, like, when I read absolute knowing, absolute idea, absolute spirit, like when I read these things, and when I think the word identity, like for me, I have to remember that people are using these things to mean what they mean rather than what I mean in this way of like the identity, the absolute knowing is this ongoing process of being absolutely unable to know absolutely. So like when I read absolute knowing, what I do in my head is already absolute knowing is being unable to absolutely know. So I have to like do this extra step of like, he probably doesn't mean what I'm thinking. He probably means what these words mean on the surface. And that, like when I use the word identity, I am including the concept of contradiction in it. But when he is going to use identity and the absolute and stuff like that. Like, there's a fair chance he's not using it that way. And again, that does come primarily from Todd and Slavoj. Like, yeah, that's just the way that I've onboarded Hegel, and onboarded notions of identity and contradiction and all this stuff. And like, it is this ongoing process. Like, it's this never ending process of contradiction that results in what presents as identity and what we see as identity and have no choice but to take as identity. But it's the identity itself is not self-identical. And I think it's probably likely that he's not using it in the way we're thinking it.
Yeah, agreed.
Also, shout out Berkeley. I like Berkeley, man, and there's a lot of problems, but I like it. It also lends itself to I think more mysticism and stuff that actually makes me angry and pisses me off. But
I mean, I would view it as one of those examples of a fruitful error.
There we go. Yeah. Absolute idea names the identity of the general structures of subjects and objects, which are named thought and being, respectively. Absolute spirit names the identity of subject and substance, or absolute idea as instantiated in a singular structure, which is a correlate of both the Aristotelian and the Spinozan conceptions of God. This lets us explain precisely why Heidegger takes Hegel's thought to represent the ultimate form of what he called ontotheology. Absolute idea is the structure of beings as such, and it is a form of beingness, insofar as it thinks being as a genus. Absolute spirit is the structure of beings as a whole, or world, insofar as it is the immanent ground of their existence in the self-externalization of absolute idea. Hegel thus thinks what Heidegger calls being, the unified structure of beings as such and as a whole, in terms of beings themselves, namely, in terms of subjects in general and a highest subject, respectively. This explicitly violates Heidegger's principle of the ontological difference.
So again, I don't know if Pete is saying that is his straight up interpretation of Hegel, or if he's taken the basic way Hegel has been interpreted and just expressing that. For me, when I hear that, I just am waiting for the Žižekian McGowian twist on it, where, okay, because it comes off as really the way Hegel's always portrayed as like the great thinker of synthetic identity. All these different oppositions are all ultimately just moments in one thing, and that thing is a subject, and it's God in a way, but it's not the way we typically think about God. And that is just, not at all how I interpret Hegel. Yeah. And so, I mean, does Hegel believe in God? I think that's one of the big open questions. Because I think if you push Todd, I think Todd would say, yeah, but it's not, it is this name for the whole. But again, the whole for Todd is a whole.
Yeah.
It's with contradictory gaps, making it what it is.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's a sense where sure, Hegel is doing this thing where substance and subject form an identity, but again, it's an identity in the identity of identity and difference or contradiction. Yeah. And that twist, like the thing is what it is not, that's true of both subject and substance, or subject and object. And yeah, so I get, but this sounds like the way I've always heard Hegel described.
Yeah. However, I'm principally interested in the identity thesis in its form as method, as absolute knowing, or what Hegel will call the concept of science, and the role it plays in Hegel's attempt to elaborate idealism as system, or to describe the structure of the absolute idea. This is the project of his masterwork, The Science of Logic. If the identity thesis provides the form of absolute idealism, then the science of logic unpacks its content.
And I guess, it's going to be more of the same. What I would say is the science of logic, to me, it is certainly a method in, it's dialectics, but again, it's exploring how a concept thinks it itself is one thing, but once dialectically interrogated, it finds that it's opposite, and that is part of what makes it what it is. And it's through this chain of thought that you keep progressing to see the deepening of contradiction all the way down. And the same is true of phenomenology of spirit.
It's like if you just imagine there's a magic letter A floating around in space, like a triangle or a tiger, but this is a letter A. And it's magical. It's just floating around in space. It's just up there all on its own. And it's just A. And it's been totally deworlded, and it's just A. There's nothing else. There's no context. There's no world. There's no system. There's no reference. Anything. Just the letter A. And imagine you encountered this magic letter A, and you did not have the alphabet. It was just A. And we're encountering A sans alphabet. So there's no context. There's no meaning. There's no reference to anything. It's just the letter A. That letter A is different from that letter A if we encountered the magic letter A floating around in space, because our letter A equals the letter A and also not A. Our letter A equals the letter A that's been worlded by the context of the alphabet, which itself has been worlded by the context of language, which itself has been worlded by the context of, speaking subjects who need to communicate with one another. So already the letter A, you can show the letter A equals A plus all that is not A. But if you truly encountered just a floating magic A and you didn't have the alphabet, it would not be A. It would not be our A. It would already be something else. It would just be A equals A, and it would be meaningless. So A already shows you that the thing equals the thing, and all that is not the thing itself, or else it's not the thing itself.
Good point. So, and then this whole thing about does Hegel fail to see Heidegger's ontological difference? I don't know what I want to say to that, because for me, Hegelian spirit, or whether we're talking absolute spirit or absolute idea, to me, ultimately what we're getting at in this identity of substance and subject is that they both share the same virtual structure, which is inherent contradiction, intrinsic contradiction.
Yep.
And that virtual structure, it's real, it's part of the material world, but in a Deleuzian virtual sense. It's funny to bring in Deleuze here, but that's how I interpret it. And Žižek has never shied away from using the Deleuzian virtual to describe these sorts of things. Yep. So it's if we say the absolute is an object, well, that is, I don't want to say that. And I don't think Hegel would want to say that either, because he's trying to pull off this identity of substance and subject. But again, it's the way that I guess I interpret that move that problematizes it. And then, to be more Hegelian than Heidegger, you could say to Heidegger, do you really have the ontological difference if you don't have beings? Doesn't the difference itself, aren't beings at the heart of being in this extimate sense, to talk like Lacan? Like, how do you have the intelligibility of beings without having no ontic basis? And how do you have any beings at all standing out as beings if you don't have being? So I don't know. I just could see a Hegelian maneuver there that incorporates both of them. I mean,
Yeah. All right. Specifically, I'm interested in the way that the identity thesis functions as a presupposition of the logic and how this relates to Hegel's famous claim that the logic is presupposition-less. This claim is true in a limited fashion insofar as the identity thesis does not function as a premise in the argument that makes up the logic. However, we can distinguish two distinct senses in which it functions as a methodological presupposition, as determining the procedure which the argument follows, and as determining the way in which the results of the argument should be interpreted. To explain this, it's necessary to say a little bit about the logic. I'm going to presume a little bit of familiarity with the work, as I'll focus on the structure of the argument rather than its content. The crucial point is that the argument is stratified. To show this, I will distinguish at least 4 separate levels at which it operates.
okay. So I guess before we do that, yeah, I like what he's doing here. I mean, look, even if we expand the identity thesis to be the identity of identity and blah 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 blah, the way that we did.
Yeah.
Identity is the identity of identity and difference. Okay. Is that a presupposition that he takes into the logic? That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't start off the logic by he doesn't start by demonstrating that or arguing for that. He just starts with being. Now, Todd has told me many times, he's like, look, there is no ultimate foundation. Like that's the problem, is searching for one axiomatic principle to start on.
Yep.
And if you're dealing with a complicated whole, you kind of can start wherever you start.
Get in where you fit in.
Peter talking about, well, he's saying there's no presuppositions. Hegel says there's no presuppositions. I mean, it's a very interesting point to make. So
yeah, I mean it is, but to me, I don't know. It does feel, I don't know. Going back to this, like everyone has a first principle, and then from that they kind of unpack everything. Like that's the point. Like we're always already going to find ourselves there, explicitly or implicitly. And it's trying to whittle that down, like taking a rough block of wood or whatever and trying to whittle it down into something intelligible and something that can actually perform work. And that work would be understanding and actually coming to terms with the world around you. I get it. And I think it's a fair point, Peter, but I also think that applies to probably everything. If it applies to Hegel, if it applies to the science of logic, then it definitely applies to everything else. Everything else.
Yeah. Okay. So to show this, I will distinguish at least 4 separate levels. Okay. Well, let's go back to explain this. It's necessary to say a little bit about the logic. I am going to presume a little bit of familiarity with the work, as I'll focus on the structure of the argument rather than its content. The crucial point is that the argument is stratified. To show this, I will distinguish at least 4 separate levels at which it operates.
The basic dialectic. This is the logic viewed as a serial progression of various categories, starting with the category of being and transitioning through nothing, becoming, and the various other categories up to the final category of absolute idea. The division of books. This is the threefold separation of the logic into the doctrine of being, the doctrine of essence, and the doctrine of the concept, which each display a distinctive internal structure which differentiates them from the others. the division of volumes. This is the twofold separation of the logic into the objective logic, which includes both being and essence, and the subjective logic, which includes the concept. The overall dialectic. This is the logic viewed as the complete explication of the implicit content of the concept of being in its systematic form as absolute idea, which contains the totality of the previous moments of the logic and their relations. This is to view the argument as a whole as a single inference or the self-overcoming of the concept of being.
I mean, yeah, I like the way he presented the different ways the book divides up.
Yeah.
That was good.
And I also think that, like, that would be, honestly, just that, like, description is like a helpful sketch, I think, for going to and actually trying to sit down and read and cope with. I think having a sketch like that could help in the reading of the book or of the work itself, I think.
Totally agree.
There are various intermediary levels here that we won't go into. The important point is that the transitions between categories at the lower levels essentially make explicit the content of the categories at higher levels. On this basis, we can see that the identity thesis does not form an explicit premise at any point of the argument, but is ultimately derived by the complete transition from being to absolute idea, which demonstrates the identity of object and subject, or being and thought. However, this is not a justification of the identity thesis, but merely its transition from an implicit condition to an explicit principle of the system itself. To take it as justification would be to fall into a vicious circle, as Hegel himself understood all too well. We can now...
I would just say, okay, fair. Like, I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can now characterize the two functions of the identity thesis as implicit methodological presuppositions of the system in more detail. In its function as a deductive procedure, it determines the dialectical structure of the logic. It constitutes a non-intentional form of thought in which we do not use pre-individuated concepts to form fixed propositions about particular objects, but instead think the content of concepts directly, allowing them to imminently transform themselves into other concepts by way of what Hegel calls speculative propositions. The logic uses this method in order to carry out an imminent deduction of the structure of thought itself by beginning with the most minimal content that can be thought, indeterminate immediacy, which is named being insofar as it is the one concept that applies to all objects, or as Heidegger correctly notes, the highest genus of beings. The procedure of the logic is then to systematically explicate what is explicit in this content, and thus the structure of conceptual thought as such. The result of this is that the logic does not start with a complete method, but systematically explicates its own process of explication as it goes.
I guess the only thing that I would want to highlight here is just, like you start with the indeterminate immediate, which is being, what it is, the isness of anything that is. And then when you start to think it, you start to go, wait a second. Well, that's nothing. Indeterminate immediacy is nothing. It has no positive characteristics or concrete determinations. So it's nothing. So, but it's not nothing because being is the opposite of nothing, and we mean something different by them. And so to understand how something becomes, it means you get this play of being and nothing. That's what becoming is, which gives ground to determinacy or determination, determinate being. that something is some things, but not other things. And it's through this blend of being and nothing that you get determination, which, you
Right.
know, the A that you talked about, the A really is not B, not C, not D.
Exactly. And
Right.
that's what completes it and allows it to become a thing that it is by its not B-ness, and also not C-ness, and also not D-ness. Like, you go through this series of, well, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. It definitely is, but it's not these things. And so the status of it, like the determinacy of it, is this thing that, like, it's a process, and it's dependent on all that it is not to flesh out what it is. And it only becomes what it is by not being what it isn't.
So being itself, though, circles back around to absolute idea. And through thinking through all these categories, what you're really doing is thinking through the variations of being itself. Like, these are the core virtual structures. So identity, difference, quantity, all of these are instantiations or modes of being. And then the whole of all of this, when you come to see being unfurled as a whole, it's absolute idea.
Right. In its function as interpretational schema, it determines the system produced as both a logic and a metaphysics. The identity thesis guarantees that an imminent deduction of the logical categories of thought is simultaneously an imminent deduction of the metaphysics categories of being. This schema is made explicit within the subjective logic, where the category of being becomes explicit as a concept, and the transition to absolute idea makes explicit the identity of being with its concept. This is the point at which the logic is determined as theology, insofar as it is here that the externalization of absolute idea in its form as absolute spirit is demonstrated.
So again, if thought and being, or thought and reality, I'm using that loosely here, or in semiotic terms, if the sign and the referent, you know, if you're forming a unity of them, that's what's going on here. But again, it's on the basis, to me, of this virtual structure that both have in common, that make it where they can be said to be identical. It's not that matter, or it's not that matter doesn't exist or physical objects do not exist. It's that the very concept or thinking of them correlates in a certain way to them, and both share this same virtual structure. So thought itself is inherently contradictory, being itself is inherently contradictory. Now, again, I don't know if that's Peter might reject that. Sure.
Right.
But again, that's just where I'm coming from with it.
Yeah. I want to, I don't know, mereological nihilism. It was popular probably a decade ago in the internet atheism world, where people were arguing about, are you a nihilist? Are you a deist? Are you a atheist? Are you a this? Are you a that? People started throwing around the term mereological nihilism. And it's a silly thing, but there's also, I think, like a refined version of it, which can lead you to make the claim that, you know, chairs don't exist, or tables don't exist, or nothing exists as such, because everything is, everything has to be named. Like matter, everything is matter. Even the vacuum is matter. It's just very sparsely populated matter. And the thing that turns a raw collection of matter into a chair is the observing subject who decides that's a chair. Like, it's not just undifferentiated matter, but like there is a way in which you can view the world as undifferentiated matter, because at the subatomic level, it's all quarks and gluons and bosons and mesons. Like, it's all matter. And so it's not until you encounter the contradiction of, yes, it's quarks and electrons and protons and gluons. Yes, it is that, but it is also arranged in such a way as to make these specific arrangements. And then you zoom out from the subatomic to the microscopic to the human scale, and look, it's a chair. Chairs actually do exist. Like, and so in that way, like we're already dealing with I don't know, just yeah.
Look, I mean, one way I remember I used to put it are signifiers are chisels,
Yes.
or signifiers are highlighters,
Yes.
something like that, and selective highlighters, which is to say we contingently select what determinations we want to group together in little chunks. Yes, I think we certainly do this on some level, which is to say, if you're somebody who doesn't know how an engine works in a car, you just see a big chunk of matter. If you know the signifiers for each part, the whole thing shows up as this,
Interconnected
Yes.
assemblage. Yeah.
But the thing
Well, it's the same
is,
thing.
the thing is, though, weren't the determinations there, and that the signifiers don't literally make the engine have
No, yeah.
determinations.
Yeah, it's this process that we participate in. But like, yeah, it is a material process. But yeah, it's the same thing with like the person who, I don't know, you look at the cell phone and if it's not working, you think this entire machine is broken. And it's like, no, there's one component of the machine is broken. And but
You might not know the name of it.
Right. And everything operates in this way where it is a material thing. But because we are the subject, it's also this process that operates on, predication and judgment, but we're participating in it. Like, it's not to say that the matter isn't there. The matter is there first. The matter is there before we get to it. But once we get to it, this is the process that we go through to describe it.
Yeah.
So, on this basis, we can see that in order for the logic to be justified in both the form of its reasoning and the content of its conclusions, then the identity thesis must be independently validated. If the science of logic corresponds to Kant's metaphysical deduction of the categories, then the phenomenology of spirit corresponds to the transcendental deduction of their validity.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Why is Hegel an absolute idealist? The argument of the phenomenology is motivated by responding both to skepticism and the transcendental response to skepticism. The transcendental response, which is exemplified by Kant's response to the Humean skepticism, promises to show that knowledge is possible by analyzing the structure of knowledge in the form of the conditions of the possibility of knowledge. For Hegel, this begs the question insofar as it presupposes some kind of knowledge about knowledge that itself is unsecured. I'm going to call this the problem of transcendental method. Hegel tries to sidestep this problem and thereby secure a form of unconditioned or absolute knowledge by returning to the most extreme form of skepticism, Pyrrhonian skepticism. The problem posed by Pyrrhonian skepticism can be described in two ways. It is originally posed by Sextus Empiricus as the problem of the criterion, which asks how we can find a criterion for choosing between a proposition and its negation that does not itself require a criterion to be justified. However, its most clear formulation is Agrippa's trilemma, which asks how it is possible to justify any proposition, in contrast to its negation, without either A, merely asserting its truth, bare assertion, B, appealing to another proposition that itself must be justified, regress, or C, justifying it by appeal to itself, circularity. Hegel uses this to clarify the problem of transcendental method. He takes it that, in trying to describe its structure conceived as conditions of possibility, the transcendental philosopher implicitly assumes that knowledge is possible, and that this is precisely what the Pyrrhonian skeptic denies. Hegel's response is then to describe the structure of knowledge as it appears, thereby bracketing the question of whether the structure actually makes knowledge possible. The crucial insight that enables him to do this is that the Pyrrhonian skeptic must explicitly pose the problem of the criterion, and that this involves describing the structure of justification in order to show its impossibility. In essence, if the skeptic is permitted to describe the apparent structure of knowledge in order to undermine it, then so is Hegel. He does this by providing what he calls the concept of natural consciousness.
Yeah, this is good stuff here. Yeah, it's this whole, I mean, this is where we're getting at the heart of, I don't know, what some people would call real philosophy. How do you really ground thought? It seems like we're always thinking, especially when we're doing theory, but obviously we're taking certain things as presuppositions or groundless grounds, right? Yep. It's hard for me to envision. I mean, the search for some absolute criterion just has never worked out well. And maybe you start going, well, maybe that's the problem, is that we're presupposing we need an absolute presuppositionless.
Maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a problem.
Maybe that's the problem.
Right.
But here is a problem. Simply believing what you're told based on an authority figure is a problem.
Absolutely.
So the thing is, if you transfer this real concrete problem of simply believing something because someone tells you to, or someone says, I have the authority to say this and you don't, so believe it or face the consequences. Yeah, problem. The search for some absolute presuppositionless ground of knowledge, when knowledge itself very well could be this complex array of various components that do not have any one fundamental presupposition. I mean, open questions here, but
yeah,
I like this part a lot.
There's I don't know. I get exhausted when we go through this type of analytic, because it does feel like ultimately it's trying to find this ultimate universal validator, or this ultimate universal navel from which we all emanate and we can point back to as the absolute point of truth. I think that's the role that God and gods have served throughout history. I think modernity is doing something different. I think modernity is trying to cast off the ultimate, or the need for the ultimate validator, the ultimate justifier, the ultimate criterion, whatever. I really do think like we have to come to terms with the groundlessness of the grounds upon which we trod. And I do get very exhausted by like this analytic, like trying to do this thing where you're just trying to poke holes in it. Now, there's a way of doing it that is actually additive, because you're trying to, like, you're kicking out the rotted wood to try to like build a strong house. But you arrive in this house of common sense and you look around and you realize, oh, all these walls and structural supports and beams, they're all rotten. So you're kicking out the rotten wood and you're trying to build up new wood with philosophy or critical thought or whatever, new healthy wood that isn't rotten. So I understand it is necessary to poke holes in things and to do this and try to find, logical fallacies and logical missteps and mistakes and all that. but it just feels like the mathematization of that modernity is doing, and trying to systematize and mathematize everything, and like moving away from shit like Hegel to Bertrand Russell, and like trying to claim that everything can be this definite absolute quantity or whatever. I feel like, I don't know, if we were all objects, that would be fine. But the point of it all is that we're not. The point of it all is that we are constituted by contradiction and negation and antinomies and like things that are just logically impossible. We are the logically impossible being. So at some point, we have to settle on logical impossibility. But I'm not accusing Peter of being one of these people who are overly analyzing.
No, he's just describing what philosophers have done.
Right.
And look, he's some kind of, I mean, the neo-rationalist, right? There's a defense of reason. The revenge of reason is here, but what that means, what that entails, we do not yet know.
We don't yet know.
We're, setting off on this this adventure here, so to speak. But yeah, I think, trying to refine how we understand how different philosophers have tried to find a grounded ground, that's important. And, I think that we settle on groundless grounds, but obviously we settle on those because philosophy has so tried to find the grounded ground, and nobody can ever agree on what it is. I mean, I think Therefore I Am, that's a pretty good one. But then you start going, hey, you're presupposing language, dude. You didn't justify the connection between language and its ability to describe reality, because you're just using language pre-critically to state your dude, you're relying on the subject predicate schema in language, in grammar, to articulate a metaphysical principle on which that you can then base a system of knowledge. You have to interrogate language and its relationship to being, which you don't do. So I'm just saying, like,
cards on the table, though. I like that. For me, like, it is that moment of saying, I think, therefore I am. That provides as close to an ultimate criterion as we're going to get. Like the ultimate validation. That is, I think, as close as we're ever going to get. And
well, I mean, it does.
I have my problems with it too.
Like, I'm just saying there's presuppositions behind that. So I think Descartes would think it's pretty presuppositionless, because given the presuppositions, you go, well, yeah, how the fuck can I think if I don't exist? Sure.
Right.
But it's like, but dude, there's more to it than that. You're saying this principle is true in reality, but you're using language to express this thing. How are you sure this medium can properly do? I'm just saying, like, that's where you can go with it.
No, and I like that a lot, and I actually think that opens up. Like, my problems with Descartes are, I think, of that nature, and of the fact that he's not accounting for the social and in this way, and I think he's not, because he didn't want to get persecuted by the church. And I do think you can read him in such a way as to have a better view of this idea of the subject or whatever. But that's getting far afield from this.
I would also want to say, dude, all of this stuff that you're saying is illusory, if you think it through, served as necessary conditions for you being able to even say this. You did not have language by yourself. You got it from this thing that you're presupposing doesn't exist. So why don't you doubt the reality of language?
Right.
But it's like he takes language out of the illusion, even though he got it from the illusion, and then uses it to reach the fundamental principle of truth.
And I think, like, you can read it in a way as to demonstrate how language, as the social field, language coming out of the distance between the self and the other, Like that rescues it. But in order to have that rescue it, you have to have that problem first of saying, yeah, but language, Descartes, what are you doing, Rene? You're using language. But you can I read Descartes by saying, oh, he's a secret filthy atheist, but he just can't say what he really wants to say because then the church will fucking persecute him like they did Galileo. But that's a fantasy of mine. But anyway, that is a little bit far afield from this book.
I mean, should we try to, like, the question, here's the question to you based on this. What is Kant doing in particular with his transcendental method when it comes to trying to find a criterion? How would you articulate what Peter's saying here, opposed to like Pyrrhonian skepticism? The problem of transcendental method, right, is what he's referring to. Hegel tries to sidestep this problem and thereby secure a form of unconditioned or absolute knowledge by returning to the most extreme form of skepticism, Pyrrhonian skepticism.
I think for me, Kant and Hegel are both championing fallibility. I think they're both ultimately saying, like, we are machines for thinking. Like, yes, we are machines that perceive, but what we do with that perception is we turn it into concepts and we turn it into understanding and we turn it into a world. So we're already trapped inside this hermeneutic circle. We're already trapped inside the machine that doesn't just perceive, but that understands. Like, I don't think dogs have a symbolic world in the way that we have a symbolic world. Now, it's also true that dogs do respond to language in some way, and they respond to, I don't know, they see the leash and they get excited. Whereas, I don't know, if you're an angry person and you're yelling at them, they're going to see that and they're going to respond to that in a different way. So they have some form of understanding, but like that is what we and humans do. We are understanders. We're not just perceivers. So we're never perceiving the world as such. We're never perceiving ontology. We're never perceiving absolute metaphysics or anything. So we're always already in language. We're always already like in this thing. So I think it's saying, like, you're not going to find this absolute that you're looking for.
I think what he's saying, though, with Hegel, though, is that what Hegel's doing as a transcendental philosopher is he's presupposing the possibility of knowledge, where the classic skeptic doesn't presuppose that knowledge is possible. If you're looking for the conditions of knowledge, that's because you think knowledge is something that's possible, or at least knowledge is something we have. The question is, how do we have it? That's different than asking, is knowledge even possible?
Right. And I think I think Hegel's saying that question does not compute. Like, the very fact that you're asking that question shows me that it's just like by nature of our position in the thing, like we're in the thick of it all. Like, of course we can have knowledge. If we couldn't have knowledge, how could you be telling me? How could you be asking me for justification? We already have it. That itself is the it's kind of like a Cartesian move. Don't you know how to use
the language you're using in order to doubt the possibility of knowledge?
Yeah, like, it's, in a sense, it's this Cartesian move of saying, well, the very fact that you're asking the question demonstrates, the preconditions for knowledge itself. I think, yeah, that's in a sense. So to go to this ultimate analytics method or mode, it is groundless. It is not. It cannot be justified. Like, I think it's coming face to face with the fact that you can either choose to be this solipsist who rejects everything because everything is already colored by their own perception and interpretation and understanding and projection. Or you can choose to take that up and say, well, I have no choice but to believe that this is knowledge because it's presenting itself to me as knowledge. And that is the justification for it. And so I have to believe that everyone around me they're not just pea zombies. Like, I have to believe that they're just like me in a sense when it comes to this thing that I'm considering knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. So because of how this pivots, maybe we should read the last paragraph here and then go straight into the next one, because I think that'll help see this point about natural consciousness.
Hegel uses this to clarify the problem of transcendental method. He takes it that, in trying to describe its structure conceived as conditions of possibility, the transcendental philosopher implicitly assumes that knowledge is possible. Yeah, that right there, that sentence. And this is precisely what the Pyrrhonian skeptic denies. Yes. Hegel's response is then to describe the structure of knowledge as it appears, thereby bracketing the question of whether this structure actually makes knowledge possible. Yeah. The crucial insight that enables him to do this is that the Pyrrhonian skeptic must explicitly pose the problem of the criterion, and that this involves describing the structure of justification in order to show its impossibility. In essence, if the skeptic is permitted to describe the apparent structure of knowledge in order to undermine it, then so is Hegel. He does this by providing what he calls the concept of natural consciousness. Before explaining the structure of natural consciousness, it's important to understand the role it is supposed to play in his justification of the identity thesis. The crucial point is that the concept of natural consciousness is the concept of the non-identity of subject and object. The phenomenology justifies the logic by showing how our ordinary understanding of knowledge, or knowledge as it appears to us, contradicts itself and thus transforms itself into its negation, or the standpoint of science. It thus shows how knowledge, as it is ordinarily understood, is indeed impossible. However, insofar as the argument of Pyrrhonian skepticism is dependent upon this ordinary understanding, it is also a refutation of skepticism. This justifies the characterization of science as absolute knowing.
What the skeptic has always presupposed is that there is no underlying identity between subject and object.
Yeah.
Hegelian dialectic shows that there is, and that forever changes both the status of being, ontology, and knowledge, epistemology.
Yeah.
So this revelation of not only as substance, but also as subject, once that has been accepted or pointed out, then, basically the skeptic is making a presupposition.
Yes.
Relies on a presupposition of the absolute non-identity. Objects are not like subjects. Subjects are not like objects in any way. And you and I are big on pointing out the differences between subjects and objects, but we do this from this existential psychoanalytic thing.
Yeah.
When we get into Hegelian territory, of course, it's a much more complicated story.
Yeah.
Of the relation there. But I think this is a good point he makes here about how Hegel takes this a step further.
Yeah. I'll now turn to describing the structure of natural consciousness in its opposition to science. Hegel's definition is extraordinarily simple. It has two basic features. Consciousness relates itself to its object or takes its object to be a certain way. What this means is that it expresses a proposition about its object. 2. Consciousness distinguishes between this proposition and the object as it is in itself. In essence, consciousness allows for the possibility that this proposition is false. These then have two implications. Because consciousness itself makes the distinction between its claim and the object it is about, the object cannot be truly in itself, but must be for consciousness. This means that consciousness must have a concept of its object in order to individuate it. However, consciousness cannot be aware that the object is for it without ceasing to be consciousness, and thus must suppress this fact. This means that consciousness cannot recognize that the concept of the object is dependent upon it without undermining the possibility of falsity.
Now, okay, this is dense philosophy here, so this is where let's go a little slow. I'll now turn to describing the structure of natural consciousness, which is the consciousness that totally distinguishes between subject and object, sees them as radically non-identical. And so natural consciousness is in opposition to science. Now, another way maybe to put this is that natural consciousness is operating in accordance with the understanding, which makes these clear-cut binary oppositions when it comes to interpreting the world. Understanding breaks things down into its component parts. It says this is this and that is that. Whereas reason for Hegel, or speculative reason, is coming to see these identities between things that are different, things that are at odds. And so that's, again, what science here means, is speculative reason. And natural consciousness, I think it's fair to say it's understanding.
Yeah.
Hegel's definition is extraordinarily simple. It has two basic features. One, consciousness relates itself to its object, or takes its object to be a certain way. What this means is that it expresses a proposition about its object. So consciousness makes a statement about something. This book is red, and I mean it's the simplest of things we do. But the point is, consciousness thinks it's making a statement, a truth claim about something that it perceives to be true in the object. Consciousness, or natural consciousness, distinguishes between this proposition and the object as it is in itself. In essence, consciousness allows for the possibility that this proposition is false. Okay, so the possibility of falseness does seem to be something on the side of us when we're going about critiquing the world, but it also distinguishes between the proposition about the thing and the thing in itself. So this is all basic philosophy 101 stuff.
So you could do example here. Look, I'm holding up this flyer I got in the mail for Falun Gong propaganda, Xinyan. I don't know if you know about this, Mikey. There's this ballet put on by Falun Gong, which is a far-right reactionary political extremist group from China. But they go around and they put on ballets and art shows and shit like that to get Americans to hate China. And every so often
they
come around and do stuff. Yeah. It's immensely interesting, dude. But a couple years ago, they did a ballet down here, and I guess they're doing another one. But they sent this pamphlet. But I could hold it up and I could look at it and say, "Oh, this pamphlet is kind of pink." But it's that's not like an essential quality about it. Like, it looks kind of pink, kind of purplish right now, especially in here when I've got colored RGB lights going on about it. I could be wrong. Under a different spectrum of light, this could be, I don't know, it could appear as a different color. Like, if I hold it this way, it appears more purple, and if I hold it this way, it appears more pink. So I think that right there is an example of kind of falsity, is being aware of how your perception and your interpretation changes how the object appears, or your kind of understanding about the object, and then separating the proposition from the object. Like, I'm not saying,
yeah, you're sitting there going, did I get it right? Did what I say get it right?
Right. I'm not saying that every Xinyan propaganda pamphlet has this essential quality that it's purple and yellow. Like I am separating the proposition from the object in the sense of.
And this is what he hasn't used the word here, but this is where representation comes into play. The
Right.
proposition is attempting to represent the object, but not as an object as such. You're using this other medium to represent, and that's the power of language. It makes something absent present, even though it remains absent, but it's represented in a different way. And the question is, what is the accuracy of our modes of representation? That's a big question. I mean, that's what I was getting at with Descartes. He presupposes that language just accurately represents reality, and that's a big presupposition on his part. So, but no, good points. Okay, so then he says what? These then have two implications. The 2 points made about natural consciousness have two implications. Because consciousness itself makes the distinction between its claim and the object it is about, the object cannot be truly in itself, but must be for consciousness. This means that consciousness must have a concept of its object in order to individuate it. I mean, look, this is the idealist dimension of it, but it doesn't mean the object doesn't have a material basis of its own. If knowledge counts as part of an object, then the knowledge, that dimension of the object in its reality depends on us. If we want to say reality, if the knowledge of the reality of this copy of The Revenge of Reason depends on us, right? Then that means some dimension of the reality of the book is dependent on us. Does that mean the whole reality of it is dependent on us? No, but if you're trying to get at the whole reality of a copy of The Revenge of Reason, you're going to have to take into account the dimension of it that does depend on us.
Right. But that doesn't eradicate the material reality.
Right.
Of the
object. It doesn't have to be, Berkeley and idealism, where there's just no material basis to the thing. Right. 4. However, consciousness cannot be aware that the object is for it without ceasing to be consciousness. Say it again. However, consciousness cannot be aware that the object is for it without ceasing to be consciousness, and thus must suppress this fact. Consciousness can't deal with the fact that it is active in the constitution of the reality of the object. It wants to act like it's this pure passive thing that simply receives the object in its pure form.
Yeah.
Without any mediating distortion. And this is like this thing that this is almost like the epistemological unconscious, not the Freudian unconscious. Like there's this dimension of epistemological consciousness that cannot deal with the fact that it is bringing something to the knowledge of the thing. It's not a pure antenna of the thing. So this means that consciousness cannot recognize that the concept of the object is dependent upon it without undermining the possibility of falsity.
Sense certainty.
Well, the falsity here, I think it's saying, I think his point is something like consciousness has to believe that it's getting a pure take on the object in order to save the concept of falsity, which is to say, like, your proposition either gets it right or gets it wrong based entirely on the way it describes the object itself. If consciousness knows that consciousness is structuring the object, then you get into much more like problems of falsity, because it's like, well, wait, I thought it's just a question of whether the proposition aligns with the object. Now it's a question of does the proposition have to align with us and then with the object, or with the object and then with us, it gets murky at that point.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, like falsity being, I don't know, abstracted from just this true or false, is the claim or the proposition about the object true or false. Then you have to take into account, like, is the perceiving subject, are they malfunctioning in some way, or are they mistaken in some way, or are they? So yeah, it's complexifying falsity. There's this guy called Donald Hoffman, I think his name is. He's, I don't know, internet guy, and he talks about perception, and he uses this, I don't know, I guess metaphor. He says the world is like, our perceptions of the world are have nothing in common with the world itself. So I don't know. He's like a weird mushroom LSD update, trying to update Kant, but he's big in like the Joe Rogan world. But he's trying to do this like modern update to Kant, but he took a bunch of mushrooms and listened to too many Joe Rogan episodes about aliens and shit. But he goes around and says, like, what you're really doing when you're in the world it's like you're playing Grand Theft Auto on a computer, or it's like you're on a computer and you're interacting with icons and you're interacting with representations of things, and it's all like you're not making, you might physically be making direct contact with the world as such, with the world as it is, but it's already filtered through this layer of perception and this layer of interpretation and this layer of understanding, so that what you see and what you think you're doing has nothing in common, is totally disconnected from what's really going on at this base ontological level. So again, it is this split between ontological and epistemological.
Which is to say nothing is really true or false if that's the case, at least when it comes to our perception of the world around us. It's all false.
Even it's all false, which means
nothing's. It's
which means it doesn't matter.
Then it's just that the whole game of trying to sort through the truth and the false, the true and the false on this plane doesn't make any fucking sense. We're deluded.
Exactly. But I mean, I don't like him because I think he's silly and goofy, and he does get a lot wrong. But on that, we are already deluded. I wouldn't say we're already deluded, but I would say we are already, like, we're already on the inside. Like, we're already looking out through eyeballs. We're already touching through fingertips that are mediated by nerve tissue and brain tissue and all. Like, we're already this complex procedure. Like, we're not going to find God. But anyway, this describes the form of intentional thought, in which we think about particular objects using fixed propositions composed of pre-individuated concepts, as opposed to science as the form of non-intentional thought, in which we think the content of concepts directly. This not only describes the deductive procedure that we follow in ordinary discourse, but it equally determines the specific dialectical method of the phenomenology.
Point is, what the phenomenology and the science of logic are concerned with, I mean, the way I would put it is the forms of experience itself and the form of thought itself, which ends up being the same form, because in phenomenology, spirit, the form is you keep interrogating different modes of experience, different modes of consciousness, and you find the same thing keeps arising. Mode of consciousness thinks it's one thing, turns into its opposite, and that's what defines its unique identity, is how it is at odds with itself. Same thing goes with the concepts or categories in the science of logic. And so that's how this whole thing moves. But he's right, it's much more about forms than it is specific content.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're investigating the forms of experience or the forms of thought.
Yeah. The phenomenology proceeds by a method of exhaustion. It does this by showing that each possible form of natural consciousness ultimately contradicts itself, thereby transforming itself into another possible form until we have exhausted all possible forms. It thus demonstrates that if knowledge is conceived as natural consciousness, then it is impossible. This progressive exhaustion of possibilities is stratified in much the way that the dialectic of the logic is stratified. As before, I will distinguish between at least 4 separate levels.
I just want to say real quick, the reason knowledge is impossible here is just because knowledge is trying to know things in a way that it is actually impossible to know them, which is A equals A.
Yeah, exactly.
Just know them as pure identities as they are in themselves without any connections to anything else and without any contradiction being involved. Well, that is impossible, the phenomenology shows. So
the basic dialectic. This is the phenomenology viewed as a serial progression of various things consciousness purports to know about its object. This is a series of propositions, each of which produces the next by contradicting itself. There is a series of such propositions within each form of consciousness, beginning with the sequence in sense certainty. This is here and now. This is here and now for me, etc., and ending in the identity thesis. The division of forms. This is the separation of sequences of purported knowings into forms of consciousness, such as sense certainty, perception, understanding, self-consciousness, etc., and ending in absolute knowing. Each of these corresponds to a general way of understanding its object that each purported knowing shares, or a concept of the object, as described in point 3. The division of sections. This is the organization of sequences of forms of consciousness into more general categories, such as consciousness, self-consciousness, and reason. Each of these corresponds to a more general concept of its object, to which its subforms correspond as species. The overall dialectic. This is the phenomenology viewed as the justification of the logic, or the transformation of the concept of natural consciousness into the concept of science.
well, yeah, because what absolute knowing arrives at least in our interpretation, is that contradiction is always at the heart of the concept. That if you're going to unpack a concept, not an experience of the world, but a pure concept, anything, right? Contradiction is going to be at the heart of it. So that's how you progress through thinking the very transcendental, the conditions of experience, right? Which would be all of these categories. So, yeah, I mean, I like how he summarized all of that. I mean, I don't know. Do you think we need to unpack those, or do you think that's pretty clear with what we've done already?
Yeah, I think it tracks. And I do like how he's setting this up and kind of breaking it all out. This structure lets us see the way in which the phenomenology is still a dialectic, albeit one that consists in propositions that are purportedly absolute, rather than speculative propositions that are explicitly transitional. Each form of consciousness is a concept whose content is thought imminently by the method of exhaustion. These form a hierarchy of genus and species that correspond to the various higher-level ways of dividing the dialectic. The concept of natural consciousness is the highest genus, with each level beneath it divided into mutually exclusive species. The dialectical method of exhaustion thus consists in traversing the hierarchy in a double movement. One moves between the genre within a given level by unpacking their internal contradictions, and one does this by exhausting all of their species in a similar manner. The inferences between propositions at the lowest level thus imminently constitutes movements between concepts at the higher levels. What this means is that the phenomenology is a logic of consciousness first, a teleological history of consciousness second, and it is at no point anything like an introspective psychology.
Oh, I think that's a nice description of
Yeah.
what's going on there, and using the species, genus, schema there to kind of explain how Hegel's progressing. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And so far he's kind of just laid the context. This fourth section is going to be where he says how Hegel goes wrong. All right, we're back. There was a cut because I needed a beverage.
Beverage.
Well, Nance, I'm interested. It's almost like we did a little cliffhanger for ourselves. Where is this going? Where does Hegel go wrong? I'm curious to see what Peter has to say here.
I am too, man, because I don't find anything like problematic up till now, but we are at the point in the essay titled "Where Does Hegel Go Wrong?" But I have no idea. I have no idea where he's going to go with it, and that's usually I feel like I can anticipate. Like, I feel like I was expecting this piece to, I don't know, talk more shit about Hegel, because I feel like a lot of people talk shit about Hegel mistakenly. So up till now, yeah, I think it's just been like, okay, cool. I'm on board with that. I agree with that.
Look, and we're influenced by two very prominent Hegelian philosophers, Slavoj Žižek and Todd McGowan. And yet, we were talking a second ago off camera, where we're like, if we had Todd here the whole time, would he disagree with any of this? Because I don't think he would.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I throughout this, I was waiting for like, oh, this doesn't click with what? No, like this has all been pretty fucking great. So, but he sees a big flaw here, a big mistake, which of course he said at the beginning can be very productive of, further philosophizing.
Yep.
So it's not I don't think it's a damning thing like, oh, we never read Hegel. I don't think that's the point at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm as curious as you are to see where this goes. I definitely regardless of where it goes, this is definitely something I'm going to tell Todd he needs to read this piece and let us know what he thinks.
Yeah.
But this has been great so far. So let's see what the big finale is.
Where does Hegel go wrong? Hegel's great mistake. Hold on.
Hegel's great mistake
is to be found in the way in which he sets up the argument of the phenomenology, rather than any particular part of the dialectics of the phenomenology and the logic.
All right, I'm already hooked. Okay, I'm interested.
Yep.
All right, Peter, let us know. Where's this going?
It consists in the fact that his response to the problem of transcendental method is fundamentally inadequate. To understand this, it's necessary to see how it is that Hegel's concept of natural consciousness is supposed to improve upon the Pyrrhonian skeptic's minimal description of the structure of justification.
Okay.
All the Pyrrhonian needs, in order to articulate the Agrippine trilemma, is an account of assertions, the propositions these assertions express, the relations of incompatibility between these presuppositions, and the relations of consequence that enable them to justify each other. Hegel's response to this is essentially that it is insufficient to capture the appearance of knowledge. His concept of natural consciousness replaces this with an analysis of the internal structure of propositions in terms of objects and concepts. The rest of the Pyrrhonian model is implicit within this simple structure, insofar as it follows from the interactions between the possibility of falsity and the conceptual suppression. Indeed, one can look at the first three sections of the dialectic, sense certainty, perception, and understanding, as making these features explicit: subject predicate, structure, incompatibility, sense certainty, perception, and understanding is making these features explicit. Subject, predicate, structure, incompatibility relations between predicates, and consequence relations, respectively. Hegel's problem is that it is possible to level the charge of insufficiency that he directs at Pyrrhonian skepticism against his own account of the appearance of knowledge. We are thus faced with a renewed form of the problem of the criterion, namely, how do we choose between competing accounts of the appearance of knowledge or accounts of the ordinary structure of justification? This is nothing other than the problem of transcendental method.
So he's saying, let's pause right there because we need to get clear on what's been said so far before we move on. He's saying that Hegel doesn't justify his justification. Is that it? He doesn't. He wants to justify the science of logic on the basis of the phenomenology of spirit. And where does he say that? Where did he say that the phenomenology justifies the logic? Oh, this the overall dialectic, page 220, top. This is the phenomenology viewed as the justification of the logic, or the transformation of the concept of natural consciousness into the concept of science. So, what justifies the work being done in the science of logic is the work that was done in the phenomenology, and yet there's no justification for that justification. I think that's the point.
Yeah.
And trust me, I'm doing my best to, I don't want to misrepresent Peter's position. Certainly I'm not trying to straw man it. I'm trying to get clear on it. Is that what he's saying? Is that the phenomenology functions almost as a groundless ground? Like, it is the justification, but it is itself not justified in being the justification.
Yeah, because I think, indeed, one can look at the first three sections of the dialectic. Sense certainty, perception, and understanding is making these features explicit. Subject, predicate, structure, incompatibility, relations between predicates, and consequence relations. So in sense certainty, subject, predicate, structure is problematic. In perception, the incompatibility relations between predicates is problematic. And in understanding, consequence relations are problematic.
So hold on. But then he says Hegel's problem is that it is possible to level the charge of insufficiency that he directs at Pyrrhonian skepticism against his own account of the appearance of knowledge. It's insufficient because it's not itself justified or argued for. Is that right?
I think
we are thus faced with a renewed form of the problem of the criterion. How do we choose between competing accounts of the appearance of knowledge? So Hegel presupposes that his appearance of knowledge is the appearance of knowledge, and certainly other phenomenologists, and I don't mean just Husserl or Sartre, but other people who would describe the form of the appearance of the form of knowledge, or the form of the appearance of knowledge, would describe it differently than Hegel did. So did Hegel truly, in saying, I start with sense certainty, then I go to perception and understanding, I work my way up through all these different modes, wouldn't other people probably have different orders, highlight even different types of consciousness that Hegel missed? And therefore, Hegel accepts that what he did in phenomenology is justification enough. But I think Peter's saying, no, there's other ways to approach. There's other ways to have different varying accounts of the appearance of knowledge.
Yeah.
And you just settled with what you did as if that was sufficient in and of itself. But just like you're saying, Pyrrhonian skepticism is insufficient. In fact, your own description of the appearance of knowledge is insufficient in and of
Yeah.
itself. Like, it needs further justification.
Let's see. In essence, even if Hegel does not presuppose that knowledge is possible, he does not have an account of what it would be for an account of the appearance of knowledge to be sufficient. This is perfectly consistent with the idea that Hegel's concept of natural consciousness describes necessary features of the structure of knowledge. We simply need a deductive procedure that is capable of deriving it, and whatever other features of the structure of knowledge are necessary. This is just to ask after the proper method of transcendental philosophy.
So I think he's saying, look, you haven't established a proper justification for transcendental philosophy. Like like that is, again, you're relying on priors.
Yep.
That are not themselves justified on the basis of your system.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, to go back up, let's go back to the paragraph above. How do we choose between competing accounts of the appearance of knowledge? So again, the phenomenology of spirit is one possible depiction of the appearances of knowledge. And by appearances of knowledge, we mean the way that sense certainty tries to know the world, the way perception tries to know the world, the way understanding tries to know the world, so on, all the way up to absolute knowing. There's different approaches to this, at least possibly. I'm not saying anybody has truly tried to do a phenomenology of spirit that isn't Hegel's, but it is possible to try to redo this book by emphasizing different types of experience and attempts to know the world, right? And look, Doug Washer, my old, philosophy mentor, know, I took a few classes at community college and they were all his. They were his philosophy classes. And I remember having a conversation with him where he was like, don't drugs, don't they have the possibility of opening up knowledge about the world that without those forms of experience you wouldn't have? I mean, I think a lot of people say that. I think a lot of people also have problems with that. But does DMT, does acid, can they reveal things about the world? Can they let us know the world in certain ways that, typical consciousness cannot? And I mean, that's at least an open question.
Yeah.
And Hegel is certainly not describing DMT experience or LSD experience. And so, and look, a lot of philosophers would just say, well, all of that is illusory. But that's a pretty gut reaction to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also I think our perceived world is also illusory. Like it is dependent on our eyeballs and our skin and our nerve receptors and all that. Like it is true that we're always already seeing through the scanner darkly, or through the mirror, the looking glass dark. Like we always already are inside the machine looking out through our eyeballs. So look, I think that the DMT, LSD, mushroom bros are overdoing it. Because they're like, oh, this DMT showed me there's little gnomes and the world is math, and
Nance,
they talk to me.
Elves. Thank you.
Machine elves, yeah. But like, that's not true. But it's also true that like I'm already on the inside of my sensorium. Like like I'm looking at my computer monitor right now, and what I see is a computer monitor, but what's really going on is, the electrons and the protons and the quarks and the this and that. Like, we're already not seeing the world or the world in itself. So yeah, I don't know. I think it is true. There are different ways to investigate knowledge about the world.
Let me ask you this. So Kant lays out space and time are the transcendental pure forms of perception or intuition, as he calls it. Causality, substance, unity, these are the pure categories of the understanding. Then you have the transcendental schema. Okay, all of this a priori or prior to experience, machinery makes experience possible. Is that the end of the story? Is that really, are there not other accounts of how we might be able to explain, like, no, these other things are the transcendental conditions of experience? You're leaving things out. How do you justify your account of what's transcendental? And I think that's what Peter's point is.
Yeah.
I don't know how much he would say this applies to Kant, but I feel like it does, but maybe he would say it doesn't, but because he's saying it's specifically Hegel's mistake. But I think the question of how do we, if there's various accounts, differing accounts of what comprises the transcendental, then on what principle do we select which one is true from the others that are false?
Yeah.
And I think if you're being a truly systematic philosopher in the way Hegel is, and if you don't provide that, you could say there's a gap there, right?
Yep.
So I think if I understand his point, I think it's a fair point as far as I know.
Yeah. And I think it's an opportunity. Like he says, this is just to ask after the proper method of transcendental philosophy. I mean, I think that, that is a fair point. And I think it's an opportunity rather than saying Hegel is wrong. Don't read Hegel. I think he's saying this is an opportunity to gain further insight into something.
So look, I think this you already read it, but I think this is the key statement. In essence, even if Hegel does not presuppose that knowledge is possible, so he's not describing the reality of knowledge, he's just describing the appearance of it. I'm just starting with the appearance. This is similar to Husserl with the epoche, with bracketing. Like, I'm just going to describe how things are appearing to me. And so Hegel's describing how attempts to know the world appear to consciousness, right? To the subject. So, but without saying any of this is absolutely true, I'm just doing a phenomenology. I'm interrogating the appearance, the phenomenon. In essence, even if Hegel does not presuppose that knowledge is possible, he does not have an account of what it would be for an account of the appearance of knowledge to be sufficient. Why is Hegel's phenomenology sufficient? Yeah. Does Hegel explain why his depiction of the appearance of knowledge is the proper one, that it's sufficient to meet this justification of the science of logic? Now, this is exactly where I wish Todd was sitting here with us, because I would love to know what he thinks. This is the point. It's like, hey, Todd, I'm going to bug you to read this until you tell us what you think.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna start reading. What else are we gonna add?
But I mean, let me read it once through too. In that paragraph, this is perfectly consistent with the idea that Hegel's concept of natural consciousness describes necessary features of the structure of knowledge. Like, okay, you could very well be describing necessary features of the structure of knowledge. That's fine. Why is that? Why is what you've done enough?
Yeah.
Justify that to us. And I think that's what he doesn't do for Peter. We simply need a deductive procedure. Deductive, of course, being not based on experience, but pure a priori reasoning. We simply need a deductive procedure that is capable of deriving it, and whatever other features of the structure of knowledge are necessary. This is just to ask after the proper method of transcendental philosophy. So this is why this mistake can be productive, because it makes us refine what
Yep.
any transcendental philosophy in the future needs to be able to account for.
I thus think that Hegel's failure to justify the logic is the greatest mistake in the history of philosophy for two reasons. On the one hand, it demonstrates that if we are to deal with the problem of skepticism, we must become transcendental philosophers. This is to say that it demonstrates the necessity of transcendental philosophy. On the other hand, it lets us clearly pose the problem of transcendental method, or the question of what transcendental philosophy is. How do we eminently describe the structure of ordinary discourse? There
I don't
are
really
a
have much
number.
to add. I think that was pretty clear, and he's just
Yeah,
stating, like, if you're going to do transcendental philosophy in light of this mistake, here's what it's got to be able to do.
yep. There are a number of further things that can be said about this more determinate formulation of the problem of transcendental method. It would be correct to point out that it is very close to Hegel's own project, insofar as Hegel takes the logic to completely explicate the conceptual structure of all forms of thought, including the ordinary form of thought found in natural consciousness. However, it would be an error to think that it is just restating Hegel's own problem, because Hegel takes the form of thought through which the structure of the ordinary form is deduced, science, to be completely opposed to this ordinary form, natural consciousness. For him, science and natural consciousness are mutually exclusive species of the genus of thought, which is only properly explicated by the logic. By contrast, my approach takes ordinary thought, natural consciousness, or discourse, to be the genus, and the special form of thought that explicates it, science or transcendental discourse, to be a species of it.
What's lighting up for you in that?
I don't know. So it's almost to say that, like,
Is Peter not being quasi
more Hegel than
Heideggerian? I
Hegel?
don't know if if that would make him cringe. Sorry, dude. It sounds Heideggerian to me, where it's like, no, our
Yeah.
everyday being in the world is the fundamental transcendental over the scientific theoretical the overly conceptual approach to things. And I don't know, I'd love to know if Peter would agree with that. By contrast, my approach takes ordinary thought, natural consciousness, or discourse to be the genus and the special form of thought that explicates it, science or transcendental discourse, to be a species of it. So the theoretical discourse depends on the lived everyday discourse. It does sound Heideggerian to me.
It does.
Not sure if it is, but that's how I'm kind of reacting to it.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot there. I actually think I'm definitely going to be thinking about that for quite a bit. It might also be objected that this criticism of Hegel fails to take into account the circular nature of the exposition of the logic. In moving from being to absolute idea, the logic constitutes the return of being into itself as absolute idea. What was originally implicit in the content of the concept of being is thereby made explicit. This is equally the case with the logic's own method, which is merely implicit at the beginning but becomes fully explicit at the end. This is not a vicious circle of justification, but a virtuous circle of explication. However, we can see that not only does the inadequate justification of the concept of natural consciousness in the phenomenology undermine the justification of the logic as such, but it brings into question the method of the phenomenology itself. insofar as the latter is already implicitly dialectical in a way that is neither explicated nor justified until the logic. This reintroduces an element of viciousness into the circle that Hegel's philosophy traces.
I think that's one of the coolest paragraphs in the whole piece. Certainly gives you a lot to think about when you're trying to zoom out and think about Hegel's system as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fucking cool.
Transcendental philosophy can avoid this residual viciousness while retaining only the virtuous elements of Hegel's explicative approach. It can do this because, given that transcendental discourse is a species of discourse in general, the imminent deduction of the structure of discourse will at the same time be a description of the general structure of this deduction itself. The two challenges for this approach are to show that the genus of discourse imminently differentiates itself into various species, including transcendental discourse, and to find an explanatory primitive that cannot be rejected in order to foreclose its method to justificatory regress and circularity. Its virtuous circle would then consist in explicating the implicit content of this primitive, and on this basis, explicating its own method of explication.
Okay, before we go to the last paragraph, I kind of want to read through that slowly because I think I missed a lot of it. He's saying a lot here. Transcendental philosophy can avoid this residual viciousness while retaining only the virtuous elements of Hegel's explicative approach. All right, cool. How can we have the best of both? Right?
Yeah.
It can do this because, given that transcendental discourse is a species of discourse in general. Again, that's the Wolfendalian perspective here that I just said it seems somewhat Heideggerian. It can do this because, given that transcendental discourse is a species of discourse in general, the imminent deduction of the structure of discourse will at the same time be a description of the general structure of this deduction itself. Okay, that's a hard thought to process. So let's see if we can tinker with this sentence and work it out. Okay. Let's take the it out and put in transcendental philosophy. Transcendental philosophy can do this given that transcendental discourse is a species of discourse in general. Okay, so transcendental discourse depends on discourse in general.
Yeah.
Or everyday discourse. The imminent deduction of the structure of discourse will at the same time be a description of the general structure of this deduction itself. That's the part where you're like, wait, what? The imminent deduction. Okay, so if we're doing the transcendental and we're deducing it from everyday discourse, then we're deducing the transcendental from the structure of everyday discourse. All right, so the imminent deduction of the structure of discourse will at the same time be a description of the general structure of this deduction itself. Is it because the deduction is discourse, and so if you're describing discourse in general, you're going to be describing the structure of the discourse of discourse? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, I think
God, I want to like reword it and
yeah.
like nail it down. The imminent deduction of the structure of discourse, because it's imminent because you can only deduce the structure of discourse from everyday discourse.
Yeah.
That's why it's imminent, right? will at the same time be a description of the general structure of deduction itself. I think it's the idea that the imminent deduction of the structure of discourse, okay, will at the same time be a description of the general structure of this deduction itself. Yeah, because I think the point is the imminent deduction of the structure of discourse. If you imminently deduce the structure of discourse from discourse itself, that's necessarily going to give you the general structure, or it's going to describe the general structure of this deduction itself. That
Right.
you're trying to deduce the general structure of discourse from discourse itself.
Right.
Which is going to, because this is operating at this formal level, it's going to give you an insight into the formal structure of deduction itself.
Right.
I think that's it, but that's a very condensed, complicated statement there.
Yes.
Let's see if he clarifies it a bit here as we go. The two challenges for this approach are to show that the genus of discourse imminently differentiates itself into various species, including transcendental discourse. Which is to say, if you're trying to do transcendental philosophy, you're still doing it within language.
Yep.
And so somehow the general structures of language are making possible transcendental discourse or transcendental language. Again, it's almost like there's no meta discourse. There's no meta language. Like if you're going to try to get at if you're going to try to deduce the basic structures of knowing, the only way to do that is from the everyday discourse that you live and breathe in.
Yeah.
And define an explanatory primitive that cannot be rejected. In order to foreclose its method to justificatory regress and circularity. Its virtuous circle would then consist in explicating the implicit concept of this primitive, and on this basis explicating its own method of explication. So, look, I've wrestled with paragraphs like this my entire adult life. You're sitting there trying to pin it down so you feel like you know exactly what Peter's saying here. I don't feel like I have it entirely. It's not crystal clear yet what he's saying.
Yep.
Because it's almost like I want an example of this being applied.
Yes. I'm sitting here racking my brain trying to come up with an example
But the problem is but here's the issue, right? The point is all of this is operating at a formal level and it doesn't rely on content.
Yeah. It's like I feel like the tip of your tongue syndrome. Like when you know the thing or you feel like you're so close, but it's just a million miles away. That's what I'm feeling right now. Like I'm feeling like, okay, I definitely smell what Peter's stepping in, but I can't, it's at the tip of my tongue, but I can't get it out.
So here's okay, can I try to, this is like my own on the spot modification. I'm going to say it's a modification because I don't want to say, oh, I'm just re-articulating his point.
Yeah.
Here's what I kind of want to say that I think is going on here. So, and again, I can't shake off my Heideggerian frame of reference here. If I step back and I'm inspired by what I think Peter is saying, but I try to put it more in just a traditional Heideggerian context, I would say something like this. All right, so ordinary everyday discourse, everyday embodied language is the condition of the language we use in abstract speculative thought, which is philosophy. like philosophy depends on ordinary language. Now, philosophy might, once it clicks into that mode, it might want to interrogate or critique ordinary language. But sorry, you were speaking ordinary language before you were speaking Kant or Deleuze or Heidegger, right? And that ordinary language ultimately is the basis upon which all of our language depends. So, if transcendental discourse or transcendental language is a species of discourse in general, then he's saying, look, if you're going to talk, once you kick into this transcendental discourse and you're trying to interrogate the forms of knowledge or the forms of the appearance of knowledge, of course it's going to have the form of everyday discourse. How could it not? And so, in a sense, we can deduce certain truths about the appearance of knowledge on the basis of our everyday discourse, because it is our fundamental meaning-making system that we have. And so, yeah, and like, look, there's this, the neo-rationalists, Reza, Peter, and Ray, right? Well, Ray was part of the speculative realist thing. It makes me wonder, like, how much of a speculative realist is Peter? I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, that's getting into the details of his philosophy. But I will say this: I think that's what he's trying to get at, is that everyday language is the condition of transcendental language. And so there's going to be a way to deduce certain transcendental forms just from our the structure of discourse in general or language in general, because that's the fundamental form we're operating in. I think that's it. And because deduction is always based on the structure of ordinary language can teach us something about transcendental deduction.
Yeah.
That's the best I've got on it.
To conclude, it's interesting to look at the structure of my argument in terms that Hegel himself would find familiar, as a dialectical triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
All right, now there's maybe the first disagreement.
Yeah.
Hegel,
Transcendental.
would Hegel find that familiar? I don't.
Yeah.
He didn't use those, really.
Yeah. Transcendental philosophy in its original form is here the thesis. It is a systematic attempt to respond to the problems of skepticism, which, as Hegel points out, is vitiated by a peculiar kind of regress. Hegel's development of absolute idealism out of his criticism is then the antithesis of this original thesis. The oppositional character of the two can be seen in the opposition of natural consciousness and science. My criticisms of Hegel's positions then pave way for a synthesis of these two positions, which is not a return to naive transcendentalism or the standpoint of the abstract understanding in distinction from reason, but rather an attempt to reincorporate the truth in Hegel's ideas within a more adequate framework. It is essentially an attempt to collapse the abstract opposition between transcendental philosophy and immanent dialectic by collapsing the abstract opposition between natural consciousness and science. All of this is still preliminary, though. Precisely what the method of transcendental philosophy is and how we leverage Hegel's own insights within it is the topic of a different paper.
Look, I mean, the stuff with thesis, antithesis, synthesis kind of jumps out at me because Slavoj and Todd always emphasize that this is not going on in Hegel. Maybe Peter would have, a counter argument to that and say, actually, it is. I will say this, trying to be fair. There's something like a synthetic point, but neither Todd or Slavoj want to call it synthesis. And so
Yeah.
this pivot, is perception the synthesis of the dialectical back and forth of sense certainty? I don't know. Because the point is, they agree that there's this, when you interrogate a mode of consciousness or you interrogate a category, it runs into an internal contradiction that gives you new insight, and then you're off onto a new mode. The question is,
Yep.
so there is progress in the dialectic for them, in a sense, even if it's a deepening of contradiction, there's still points where you arrive at something new. And if it's not synthesis, then what ought we to call it? Here I'm just trying to be fair to Peter and not just, rely on Todd and Slavoj. And so I think it's fair. But yeah, the thing with thesis, antithesis, synthesis is me having a bit of fun just because, those two are so quick to reject that interpretation of the dialectic.
Yeah. I don't know. I like this piece, and I
Me
feel
too.
like where Hegel went wrong. I don't know. I like it, and I do think it's very Heideggerian. And I don't know. There's something about it that does feel Hegelian. It does feel like a deepening of contradiction. And
I think Hegel
if
would
only-
appreciate this piece.
I do too. And only to, I don't know, just to point out the situatedness of it all. Like, yeah, we're using this language. We're always already here. We're always, not only are we wrapped up in this world of like perception and understanding, but we're also like adrift in the sea of language, and we're already here and we can't do anything about it. But maybe we can, I don't know, investigate the surface of the ocean, start to plumb the depths, and use our little radar and LiDAR scanners and shit like that to try to even further situate ourselves. And I think that's what it is. So I really appreciate this. I didn't know what we were in for. I didn't know if this was what it was going to be. And I think I like where we end up. I feel like we just end up, the contradiction has been deepened. But by saying that, it's not to say anything has gone wrong or anyone's stupid or, oh, you've made a horrible mistake, you're totally off track. It's like, no, our world is richer now. Like this.
Yep.
Like, I think this is an excellent piece, Peter.
So it goes without saying, Peter, if you're listening, come talk to us. We want to have a conversation with you about your work, about this book. And we plan on, part of our intro to intro to accelerationism series, we want to read the famous blog post that Peter wrote about it. So we're definitely going to do more exegeses from this book. I'm curious to know what is this different paper that he alludes to at the very end? Is this one that's already written, or is this something he plans for the future? And
we'll see. I think it's probably still a virtual object.
Yet to be written.
Yeah.
I really want to read Prometheanism and Rationalism. That's one of the big essays in the book.
I want to read The Reformatting of Homo Sapiens. That one's not too long.
Why does anything matter?
Yeah. What was it? The game theory section of the book. There's so many pieces in this book. Art and value. What's in a game? Yeah. There's so much in this book that I'm excited to go through.
And I think the core theoretical essay here is the one in the middle, essay on transcendental realism.
Yep.
It's over, I think, 60 pages. So it would take us, I don't know if that lends itself to an exegesis, but it definitely lends itself to a discussion.
Yeah.
So, definitely looking forward to reading more of these. Guys, I hope you like this reaction. You got a little bit of exegesis from us, but, on the spot exegesis of something we've never read. take with a grain of salt. It's just us trying to understand what we're reading and what we're working through. But it's a really great fucking essay.
Yep.
And I look forward to, again, I'm going to pressure Todd. You got to read this.
Yeah.
And let us know what you think.
I know. I can't wait to hear what Todd has to say about this. Because we're gonna pressure him into reading it, and he will, because he's such a great fucking guy. He will read it eventually.
No, and I mean, with the Hegel stuff is, Hegel over Lacan, over anybody else. Hegel is his philosopher.
Yep.
And so I don't know. Maybe we can even get him to come have a discussion with us about this and share his thoughts on it. But yeah, it's really fucking cool. Peter, we really hope we can talk to you sooner than later. So, we'll try to make that happen. But either way, great job on the book, and we look forward to reading more of it. So, any closing thoughts, Nance?
Yeah, I don't know. I think doing this reaction video rather than exegesis video. Like I said, I didn't know where this piece was gonna go, where it was, even what it was gonna be all about. And I think, I don't know, Peter did not disappoint. I think this is a great piece. It's a surprising piece for me, and I think that's pretty cool. I'm not often surprised, probably because I'm overly cynical, but no, I think this is an excellent piece. Everyone listening, if you can get your hands on the book, get your hands on it. Just came out, Urbanomics. If you can't, there are, well, I'm not going to say, I was going to say there are PDFs floating around the internet, but don't do that. Pay for the book.
I mean, can we say that maybe the lesson is that to borrow a title from a famous movie, that the great mistake is the great escape, or a great mistake is a great escape, because recognizing it as a mistake allows you to escape a certain deadlock.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity for improvement. I really like seeing it as, or calling it, the great escape, because it is like, it's not saying you're wrong, you suck, this is a dead end road, you lose. It's saying, look, we have the opportunity to escape this deadlock and continue moving down.
Should we, moving forward, philosophically think of it as the great miscape? I don't, Todd will kill us. You guys with your fucking neologisms every other video.
There's a new one, folks. Pay attention.
All right, sorry. I'm gonna do another. Taking a page out of Y Theory's book. The lesson is, go watch The Great Escape.
Hell yeah. And is that on the Criterion Collection?
I don't.
I think
so.
I think it is. Is it not?
We'll find out real quick.
I just think
One
it would
second,
be funny,
guys,
if it were in the Criterion Collection. We're speaking of the problem of the Criterion, ultimate justificatory, explanatory, validator, all this. I think it would be awesome if The Great Escape was in the Criterion Collection.
Okay, you're correct. So if you want the Blu-ray, you can get it in the Criterion Collection. I don't know. Nobody can ever see screens well, but yeah, it is in the Blu-ray is. If you want the 4K, I think you're going to have to get the one released by the studio. Either way, doesn't matter. 4K, Blu-ray. The lesson is, watch The Great Escape. And if you guys have never seen it, it is a great film.
Yeah.
I did not expect to get to The Great Escape tonight, but somehow. All right, guys. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. Nance and I certainly have a lot more videos planned, and we're going to start chipping away at them, and expect more Wolfendale, more Egaristani, Brassier. They're on the horizon. So yeah, stay tuned. Later.
Peace.